Hey, true crime fans! Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
On November 7th, Thundercat, Karasoft, and NVIDIA teamed up to host a discussion with leading government panelists to speak on best practices and challenges agencies are facing with AI. Learn how we can plan to navigate complex policy landscapes, assess agency needs, and contribute to shaping the future of AI applications in the government. You can now tune into the conversation on the Feds at the Edge podcast, streaming on all major platforms. Visit thundercattech.com/events for more info. That's thundercattech.com/events.
Welcome to 31 Days of Terror, day number 25, and I have two spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from September the 25th, 2024, and like I said, I apologise. We're jumping around a little bit in the dates and the timelines, okay? And our first story today comes from Caspian. Before I get into it, I think it's important to mention that I have been acting for years, with many of my jobs being horror films of various themes, and I've never had a paranormal experience on any of them. Just in case people assume this is a case of power of suggestion or a creepy set making us all hallucinate or imagine things. To give an idea of the location, most of the filming has been contained within one building, with multiple sets being built in different rooms, deconstructed and fresh ones being built throughout the months of the shoot. We began filming on the 1st of July 2024, and initially, all anyone was thinking about was the work at hand. From day one, we had an unusual amount of technical failures. The camera suddenly developed a weird habit of switching the focus point from the actual actors' faces to random points behind us, or seemingly nothing at all. An issue that was written off as a camera glitch. The next thing to be noted was the power issues. Batteries that were fully charged would suddenly fail, either right before action or very soon into a take. And this was an issue that happened with camera, lighting, and the smoke machines. Jokes were made about set goblins draining the batteries, but no one was too bothered, aside from the delays and the inconvenience. The director joked that this had something to do with me, and that my background and interest in paranormal content and investigation had brought something to his set. Something that I denied at the time and still do. And I think the events that followed will prove my innocence here. There was accommodation on location so that the cast could stay over when filming for consecutive days, and I decided to stay after my first day of work. The following day, as we were setting up, the director asked me if I had been moving around during the night, and I said no. He then said he had been woken around 3 a.m. by a hammering on his bedroom door, and jumped up, pulling it open thinking it was me and I needed something urgently or had a problem. Of course, there was no one there. Again, we thought perhaps it was a case of extended exploding head syndrome or something like that, and dismissed it. He did mention that he had heard a lot of strange knocking recently in the building, while he'd been working on sets or in the production office. He had been dismissing it all as travelling sound from outside or from another building, but did acknowledge that it really did sound like it was coming from the front door. A few days ago, he had been standing right in front of the door, checking a lighting setup, when a loud knocking startled him. It was definitely the front door, so he whipped it open in a second to see no one there. He looked up and down the street and it was deserted. It's probably also worth mentioning at this point that this is not London, but a sleepy Surrey village. In the following days, he had heard knocking coming from the kitchen and other rooms in the building. I pointed out that this was an interesting progression. Something knocked on the front door and he let it in. It then moved upstairs and knocked on the communal rooms, but had now progressed to the room that he was sleeping in. I'm sure he was really reassured by that train of thought. Anyway, on we went, still not taking it particularly seriously as an actual haunting. A few days later, the director was reviewing some cutaway shots of inanimate objects that had been shot without any actors present, and heard a voice that didn't match any of us, saying, "Hello?" on the audio. It creeped him out a bit, and he mentioned it the next day that we were all in. That was probably the moment we started to pay more attention to the weird little things that were happening. As part of the story, we were taking a lot of Polaroid photographs in scenes, and odd faults kept appearing on them, despite the fact that we were shooting inside in a temperature-controlled environment without any weather. The ones taken within scenes could possibly be explained by the actors moving or something technical. However, it also happened with a behind-the-scenes stationary posed photograph taken between scenes of one of the cast, Emily, which I have attached. As shooting went on, a pattern developed. Knocking and sudden noises kept waking the director at 3:15 a.m. He took screenshots of the time on his phone every time, creating a log. It was always 3:15, or occasionally 3:16 by the time he took the screenshots. He insisted it was connected to my presence, but I slept like a baby and had no issues. I have a theory for why, but first I'll list the other strange occurrences. We had a broken down car, usually reliable but failed multiple times. A glass of sugar that appeared to fling itself from the cupboard and smash all over the counter in an explosive episode. No one had touched it that day. A pair of jeans that vanished completely and then reappeared neatly folded in plain sight. No one had put them there. Then one day we had an apparition. The director was standing in the hallway talking to me. He had glanced into the kitchen and then turned away. The light was off in there. Then a second later, the bathroom door at the other end of the hall opened and he stared at the actor who had walked out with a shocked expression on his face. I asked him if he was okay, and he said he had just seen her, or what he thought was her, in the darkened kitchen. He just assumed she was getting something and had turned back to me to wait for her to come out. But now we realised there was no one in the kitchen. I asked exactly what he had seen, and he said someone that matched her height, long blonde hair and very pale, probably wearing white like her costume. But he hadn't looked closely, he had just assumed that it was her. We got on with shooting day but remained curious about what he had seen. Later that day we were casually chatting about where some of the props had come from, and the director mentioned that he and the producer had nicknamed one of the shop mannequins they'd acquired Anna Mannequin, after Annabelle, the haunted doll, because weird stuff happened after they'd bought her. The mannequin in question is tall, pale, and, at times, had a long blonde wig on. I had also been talking to and playing around with her to get into character, as my character has a very special relationship with his collection of mannequins. Stunned, I asked the director if he was winding me up, and he said no. Then he went on to say the guy they bought her from did seem very relieved to be rid of her. I asked what weird stuff had happened, and he couldn't quite remember, as it had been over a year ago and things had settled down shortly afterwards. He said nothing dramatic. He thought probably just weird noises and things moving around, very low-level spooky stuff. I asked him if perhaps using her in the film, me bothering her and scenes where she'd been thrown around and generally mistreated, might be to blame for all the weirdness. And he admitted that maybe there was something to that theory. So I suppose I was indirectly to blame, but I did not bring ghosts with me after all. It's also worth noting that for a large chunk of the filming, she had been stored in bits, in a trunk, in the room that he was sleeping in. Not long after that, we had a break from filming while a new set was built, and I was at home in my flat when I heard a knocking at the door. My corridor is long and has motion sensor lights that are triggered by any movement at either end of it. When I opened the door, there was nobody there and the lights were out. It's worth noting that they take a while to switch off after activation, so I know there was no human out there and hadn't been for a while. Whether or not that's an isolated incident, we shall see. I was back on set yesterday for my second last day and was chatting in the kitchen with the producer about all the goings on. We were considering the theories, and she said it could be her mum who was passed on, as it all matched up with her sense of humour. Right as she said that, I heard a loud knock on the front door. I commented on it and she said she didn't hear anything but acknowledged her hearing isn't the best. A second later, the director passed us on the way to the door and then returned to say that there was no one there. But he had heard it too. So I guess we're left with at least two theories about this. And as I only have one day left to shoot, I think this probably wraps up my story. But if anything else weird happens, I shall send a follow-up. I have also said that any future films need to include a potentially cursed props clause in my contract. So Caspian has just been in my life recently, right? Basically, I've followed Caspian for a really long time online, and I was actually following this process of filming this film and watching his Instagram stories and etc., right? And then I got this email through about the all of the haunting things on the set, right? And then I was in London and I was on maybe the underground and I was going up an escalator and I kept seeing these pictures of this person and I was like, well, I know it's an ad. Like, I know it's an ad for something. I think it was an ad for like train travel or whatever. And I was like, but I definitely know that person. Like, who is that? And then I was like, oh, it's Caspian. So just stop following me around, please. Thank you. And this is a complicated one, right? Because I can imagine on a film set, particularly a horror film set, I can imagine you would sort of laugh off a lot of these things, you know, where you'd be like, oh, we heard knocking, ha ha ha. And particularly if it starts as technical failures, that you're going to be like, oh, the camera's glitching or the lights are glitching. You're not going to immediately think this is definitely paranormal. Or even if you did, I'm sure other people on set would be like, lol, don't be silly, we're on a horror movie set. Of course you think it's paranormal. I'm kind of dying to know about the building where all of these sets were like built and taken down and rebuilt, etc. Like, so this was presumably in the countryside in Surrey. Was it a warehouse? Was there anything interesting that had been there previously? Was it an old building? Was it just a new building? I'm dying to know. And I know that the director was like, you know, Caspian, you've done this being our resident spookster and this is your fault. You've brought something onto the set, blah, blah, blah. Sounds like the director did that himself. And I do think you're right. I think it feels like a progression. You know, we start with like knocking that progresses throughout the building and then it moves to hearing the voice on the audio, which gave me shivers, really, to be honest. And it kind of sounds like the more the director engaged with whatever this was, you know, by letting it in and engaging with the knocks, blah, 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 the more intense it seemed to get. So you started with knocks and then there was the glass jar of sugar flinging itself around, broken down car, you know, you had lots of technical issues, blah, 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 jeans moving and then being found somewhere else. And then finally he sees an actual apparition. And I will post the pictures for this. As always, the pictures go on Patreon, Instagram and Facebook. And Anna Mannequin, like, I'm not gonna lie, she is quite scary. She's quite scary looking. So I don't know, if I had her hanging around my house, I think I'd blame her for everything that went wrong as well. And I'm going to be honest, if I ever had to buy a mannequin or something for a prop for a stage show or a film and the person that was selling it seemed relieved to get rid of it, I'd be like, do you know what, actually, I've changed my mind. I'm pretty sure that you can keep the mannequin. So I guess there's two theories. The theory of the mannequin being haunted by something and that was released onto the set because she wasn't well looked after and wasn't well treated. And by that I mean, you know, in relation to the story that was being told on the set, she was stored in separate parts and your character didn't treat her very well, etc. Or is it the mother of one of the producers who is making jokes all matched up with her sense of humour? That doesn't explain the director seeing the blonde woman in the kitchen that he thought was another actor. I'm going to put it out there that I would say I would like to know more about the history of the place, this building where all of this was taking place. And I'm wondering if all of this activity, a horror movie set, maybe stirred something up rather than it being the mother of a producer or even a haunted mannequin. I mean, there's plenty of options there.
Hey, true crime fans! Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Ready for the next level of cybersecurity? October is Cybersecurity Month, and Gartner is building cybersecurity resilience in a complex world. From AI, new to role, identity and access management, to mid-size enterprise, government, and beyond. Join the Security and Risk Management Summit 2025, the largest cybersecurity conference in North America. Pre-register at gartner.com/US/security risk. That's gartner.com/US/security risk.
And our second story today comes from Andrew. Sometime before the pandemic, I worked for a private club that caters to the disgustingly wealthy. The kind of place that had a secret staircase in the back so members could sneak in their mistresses. The kind of place that had tunnels connecting it to the state capital. The kind of place that would fly college students in from all around the country and have them box each other for tuition money. For a place that has been operating like this for over 100 years, it had a surprisingly less creepy vibe than you might expect. But I thought I would share some of the creepy things that did happen there while I was working there. The place had been endlessly remodelled during its existence. And being a place with so many hidden corners, occasionally they would discover something that no one knew about. While I was there, they were knocking a hole in the wall of the basement bar bowling alley and accidentally let themselves into a sealed room. No one knows how long it had been there or why it was sealed off, or why it contained only an assortment of mirrors and a baby's crib. The last part being especially odd for a club that didn't allow women until the mid-80s. Either way, the staff had a great time making up stories about the room for a few weeks, even if none of us wanted to go into it. The place has an enormous ballroom on the second floor, the kind of room where you would have to shout to be heard by someone on the other side. Big enough and old enough that it basically had its own mini electrical grid, and you would have to turn out the lights of the second floor in sequence on your way out, or it would short and you might trap yourself in the dark. The second floor never felt creepy when the lights were on, but I never wanted to be caught in the sweep of darkness after the sequence was started. It never felt safe somehow. One day when I came in, I found all the lights still on upstairs. When I talked to a co-worker about it, he told me he was shutting things down and kept finding different rooms lit up when he knew he had turned off the lights. After a few rounds of turning off the same lights over and over again, he said he thought he heard someone talking in one of the side rooms, so he decided that he was done for the night, and whatever wanted the lights on could have them. A few other co-workers would occasionally talk about seeing a woman with red hair and a white dress standing on the far side of the ballroom while it was empty. Always out of the corner of their eyes, always red hair and a white dress. Lastly, there was the day we showed up to a mysterious pool of blood in one of the meeting rooms, large enough and thick enough to sit on top of the carpet. This was in one of the back rooms that had been empty for days, and anyone going there or rushing to the hospital from there would have passed multiple security cameras on the way. The club security combed footage and interviewed people intensively for about a week. There were no records of anything or anyone. Eventually they just wrote off the mystery pool of blood and we all moved on. Although for about a month after, everyone was convinced we were going to find a dead body stuffed in the dumbwaiter or stuck in a coat closet. But nothing ever turned up. Who knows? Maybe some remodelling crew will find someone hidden in the wall in 30 years. Oh, this story filled me with rage. I imagine working in a club like that for really wealthy people would be absolutely eye-opening, to say the least. And I could go on the rampage about extreme wealth I really could. And my belief that extreme wealth turns some people into fucking monsters. But we're not going to do that because we're here to talk about spooky things. In the kind of age of TikTok and the age of people documenting everything, like we've all seen videos to varying degrees of people finding strange things in their houses, like sealed off rooms or a well or whatever. But finding a basement room, a sealed off basement room full of mirrors and a baby's crib in a club for really, really obscenely rich people is terrifying. And equally, the thought of being in a giant ballroom with the lights, turning on and off by themselves, which is glorious, and out of the corner of your eye, like across this big giant ballroom, you see a woman standing there with red hair and a white dress. Like, just picturing that for a second, you're in this large, expansive ballroom at one end, and then you realise there's a woman standing at the other end of the fucking ballroom. Is she linked to the room that has the mirrors and the baby's crib? Is she linked to the mysterious pool of blood that showed up one day? Although I would have been like you guys and I'd been like, we're going to find a body. We're going to find a body stuffed into a cupboard somewhere or in a dumbwaiter. Like, that's what's going to happen. Oh, I guarantee you there's a dark, dark story about that woman in there somewhere. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Caspian and Andrew for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from September the 25th, 2024. And like I said, we are jumping around with dates and timelines, etc. So I apologise. We'll be going back in time for the next episode, which is very confusing. I know, I'm sorry. If you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You could also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Ready for the next level of cybersecurity? October is Cybersecurity Month, and Gartner is building cybersecurity resilience in a complex world. From AI, new to role, identity and access management, to mid-size enterprise, government, and beyond. Join the Security and Risk Management Summit 2025, the largest cybersecurity conference in North America. Pre-register at gartner.com/US/security risk. That's gartner.com/US/security risk.